It's a beautiful day, fellas. It's not as cold as it has been for the past couple of days. Crazy. Like I said earlier, I hate it when I'm cold. But hey, we surviving. How are you doing today? It's a beautiful day. Thank you very much for choosing us again. It's always a great pleasure. I always want you to come here so we can talk, we can discuss, In the world, you're going to hear news about places, about America, news about China, about Ukraine. But you're going to get the international version from America, the international version from Russia. What about the African perspective? We need an African perspective. That's why we come together. And also we talk about many things. We talk about ourselves. How do we get along? How do we progress? How does anything affect us? There's many things we can talk about. Many things we have to talk about. In South Africa, many things happening. The ANC has partnered with the DA. ANC, the political party of Nelson Mandela. Yeah, now working together with the DA, a white predominant political party. That's something nobody saw coming. We're going to talk about that. How does that mean? What's the future of South Africa out of that? Great stuff. Today we're talking about Russia, and we need to talk about this so we can understand where we are, because there are so many narratives. And I think we need to have a neutral stance. Again, we are not pro-Russia. We're not. We really don't give a continental about that. We are no pro-West either. We don't have to be pro-West or pro-Russia to have an opinion. We can have an African opinion. Okay? Let's see about this. So, in America, they have selected a new draft, which is they can now get young men to go to army. And this is going to be compulsory. So you have to register to go to the army, to learn about weapons, to learn about guns, to be ready. That's for the readiness of the United States of America. This has been passed by law, by the House. Obviously, human beings were not consulted. The population are not consulted before they do that. So the House passes a bill to automatically register young men for the draft. The House passed a large defense bill on Friday evening that include a provision that will automatically enroll young men between the age of 18 to 26 years old for a selective service. They send a very clear signal. America understands that they need to be ready because something big is about to happen. So why are we here, fellas? I mean, we all know the United States of America is a fun place. The movies, Hollywood, the Beyoncés, the Jay-Z's, the Spider-Mans. America needs to know that most countries in the world, especially Africans, sort of used to look up to them until we realize that they're just human beings. Obviously, when you watch movies, Spider-Man is America, Batman is American, Superman is American. All these great people seem to be American. You tend to think Americans are special, but with time you understand Americans also have issues like everybody else. So let's quickly look into this. The House passed a large defense bill Friday evening that include a provision that would automatically enroll young men between the age of 18 to 26. Obviously, we can see Russia is not very happy in the world right now because Russia feel offended. And we're going to try to understand. We're not going to invent anything. We're just going to base our narrative on history. This is crazy because it looked like Mr. Putin came forward a couple of days ago with a proposal of peace. He says, I want peace. If you want peace, there are two things that I want. I want the Ukrainian to leave 4 regions of the territory of Ukraine, and I want the Ukrainian to abandon their project of joining NATO. You're going to leave 4 regions of Ukraine, that's predominantly Russian, and you're going to abandon your idea of joining NATO. That's what Mr. Putin said.
The conditions are very simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. As soon as Kyiv declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, as well as officially notifies that they abandon plans to join NATO, an order to cease fire and begin negotiations will immediately follow from our side, literally at the same minute.
And before the Ukrainian reacted to that, Western politicians bashed the idea of Putin. Some even said Russia was not in a position to decide what Ukraine should do in Ukraine.
He is not in any position to dictate to Ukraine what they must do to bring about a peace. Putin can end this war today. He started this war with no provocation.
Now let's look at the story. Why is Russia fighting? The Russians say the reason why they're fighting is because NATO has moved too close to them. Even though Ukraine is not officially a NATO member, they have projects to be part of NATO. And many moves have been made so far for them to be part of NATO. And having NATO in Ukraine will represent an existential danger to Moscow. Because just think about it. If they have to shoot a missile from Kiev to Moscow, that's about a couple of minutes. And that's it. So preemptively, the Russians are thinking the best way to move is to push NATO out of Ukraine or to recuperate the eastern side of Ukraine. Now, why do they believe they have that right? Let's look back into history. Many years ago in Europe, we had the communists, which are the Soviet Union, the Chinese, and many others, and we had the Western nation were capitalist. They were two separate groups. They never really got along very well. And this little city in Europe named Berlin was divided in two parts. One side was occupied by the communists, the other side was controlled by the West. Then, as per history, there was a negotiation between America and the Soviet Union. The negotiation said, if you allow Berlin to be one in all, meaning if you leave Berlin and you allow us to have Berlin, we will not move to the east in 1 centimeter, meaning we will not take up any other country. We will not do anything. NATO expansion will not be on the east, but just allow us to have Berlin. And that was a negotiation between Reagan and Gorbachev. Let's hear what Bobby Kennedy says about this.
Putin every day says, I want to settle the war. Let's negotiate. And Zelensky has said, we're not going to negotiate. But in 92, the wall came down in the Soviet Union. Gorbachev said, I'm going to allow you to reunify Germany, but I want your commitment. After that, you will not move NATO 1 inch to the east, and we solemnly swore we wouldn't do it. Well, then in 97, we're going to move NATO 1,000 miles to the east and take 15 countries into it and surround the Soviet Union. We then overthrow the government. In 2014, their elected government and put in a Western sympathetic government. Russia then has to go into Crimea because they have a port at Vladivostok. It's their only warm water port.
As you could see, Bobby Kennedy said very clearly, the agreement was, you leave us Berlin, we're not going to take up any other country. Bobby Kennedy said, in 1997, NATO had already taken 15 other countries, so they breached their own contract. So to complete this, Nigel Farage in the European Parliament came up with the same story. Let's hear what he said.
Just to make that worse, of course, some NATO members said they too would like the Ukraine to join NATO. We directly encouraged the uprising in the Ukraine that led to the toppling of the President Yanukovych, and that led, of course, in turn to Vladimir Putin reacting. And the moral of the story is, if you poke the Russian bear with a stick, don't be surprised when he reacts.
As you can see, Nigel Farage said, he says the West brought war to Ukraine, and I'm citing, he says it's NATO's fault that Putin has invaded Ukraine. Because in 2014, Russia moved into Ukraine. They believed that the president of Ukraine at the time was pro-Russian. And the European overthrew him because he was not willing to make a deal with them to place a Western-friendly president. And when Russia saw that, they sent troops in Ukraine to go and defend the territory, to confiscate Crimea, which is the only warm port that Russia has. Now let's hear Nigel Farage explain again right now what's happening with Putin.
I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, there will be a war in Ukraine. Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
So, if we have to go just with the basis of stuff that we have right now, I mean, many people are saying there was never a deal signed between the West and Soviet Union saying that they're not going to move to the right. You will hear many voices today in a way saying that there was never a deal between the West and Soviet Union. They're not going to take up other countries. But here is a declassified document that shows where the West signs with the Soviet Union that they will not move to the right. If the Soviet Union allowed Berlin to be free. Now, my question is this. Does it even make sense? Now, America is bringing soldiers together. You're going to get registered by force, in other words, for a war you didn't choose. And I don't understand why does America have to automatically register young people who clearly don't know anything about it. We also know there's a big American-based company named BlackRock that has signed a contract to rebuild Ukraine. So the war is still going on, but they've already signed a contract who's going to rebuild the country. Now, let's think about this. If I have a contract on how to rebuild a place that's being destructed, like in war, do I want to rebuild 5 houses or do I want to rebuild 100,000 houses? Now, I'm just asking a question. If my way of making money is through rebuilding houses, do I want to rebuild 5 houses? Do I want to rebuild 500,000 houses? Clearly, I want to rebuild 500,000 houses. Now, how do I get to 500,000 houses? It's very easy. The war must continue. That's how I make the most money. right? So there's a lot of things into this. And again, we are not pro-Russia or pro-West. We don't really care. We are pro-African. We want to know the truth. And we also have families living in America, family in Europe, and some families in Russia. So if war started and there was atomic bomb launched here and there, some of our family may be impacted. It is beneficial to us to understand the narrative. Now, is this the perfect narrative? Maybe not. But in the meantime, these are facts and history fact that we know. Does Ukraine has the right to defend itself? Absolutely yes. They have the right to have a destiny. They have a right for peace. But should we all enter a war, a World War III, where most people will probably die because Ukraine is at war? Then I don't think that makes sense. I don't want to die for Ukraine. I'm sorry, I love them, but I don't want to die. I want to live. Do I have the right to say that? Are there people that share my opinion? Probably yes. No, there is a solution. The solution is a peaceful solution. How about we look into that? Instead of going on and on and on and on, because we all know Russia sent a warship to Cuba. We know America sent a warship too to Cuba. We know that Russia has gone to North Korea to discuss. Are they going to give them weapons? We're not interested in war, but I think historical facts should bring us to the table. War shouldn't be business, where people make money, money, and money. There's also another issue. Here's what Donald Trump said.
I think Zelensky is maybe the greatest salesman of any politician that's ever lived. Every time he comes to our country, he walks away with $60 billion. And I like him. You know, on the impeachment hoax #1, he was very good. He said, no, the president didn't threaten me at all. He could have been a grandstander and said, I was threatened, right, Matt? He could have said, I was threatened. So I like him. But he's the greatest salesman of all time. He walks in. So now here's the beauty. He just left 4 days ago with $60 billion, and he gets home and he announces that he needs another $60 billion, else it never ends. It never ends. I will have that settled prior to taking the White House as president-elect. I will have that. Gotta stop it.
Donald Trump believes that Zelensky is the biggest salesman. He says every time he comes out of the United States of America, he gets billions of dollars. My question is, why is billions of dollars involved? Don't you feel like every time there are billions of dollars involved, there are generally catastrophes happening with us? I don't know. Let me know how you feel about this. It's always a great pleasure. God bless.